actually because of the success of Blue Rodeo. When Blue Rodeo started to become huge around 1986, suddenly roots bands came up everywhere in Toronto. And I remember thinking at the time, like, oh man, these guys are like ruining the music scene, you know, because I was like all into, you know, all this music was like, you know, there's all this dark, like sort of experimental, um, gothy type music going on that I was pretty into. And then suddenly everybody started wearing plaid shirts and playing acoustic guitars and sounding like the band, you know, and I was like, what the hell's going on here? But being a professional, you know, you can't just sort of go, well, I'm not doing that. And I was like, okay, I got to adapt, you know? So I did. And, you know, you know, I had to started listening to the band and basically, you know, learning, understanding, you know, country influenced rock music. And from there, I ended up playing with Andrew Cash. And Andrew Cash was an artist who he first came out in a Clash influenced punk band called L'Étranger, which he was in with this guy Charlie Angus, who's now Charlie is now an MPP, member of the NDP, and he's been a member of Parliament in Northern Ontario for a long time now. I think at least 15 years. And Charlie's an amazing guy. And Andrew actually also ended up becoming a member of Parliament for the NDP later in life. But he went from L'Étranger to starting a solo career, and that was kind of roots based. And he got signed to Island Records, and he released his first record called Time and Place, and then he was looking for a new drummer, and I auditioned and joined that band, and toured with him. I was with him for about 4 years, and I played on a record of his called Boomtown, which we recorded down in North Carolina. And while this was happening, I was still playing in other bands. But once I joined Andrew, that was a pretty full-time concern, at least for the first couple of years. So that became my main focus. And so we recorded Boomtown and toured Canada and the States with him. We opened for Melissa Etheridge in Europe and did an extensive European tour. And this was, you know, while I was a dad of a young son. And while this was happening, Blue Rodeo's first drummer, Blue Rodeo happened, like I say, you know, and sort of changed the landscape of Toronto. And so I was aware of Blue Rodeo, obviously, as everybody was. And I thought they were great. I didn't have any of the records. I didn't really go out and buy, you know, other local bands' records. You had local bands' records if they gave you a copy of their record, right? But you didn't go and like, oh, man, I'm going to go and, you know, get my buddy's record, listen to it all the time. Because you know, you already heard them. Like, you know, you opened for them and they opened for you, you know, like, and but I remember being really impressed with Rodeo's first album, and but there was also a slight resentment, you know, because which there always is, like when other local bands do really well, and you're kind of like, well, what's so great about them, you know? Like, but I remember going to see them before the first album came out. I remember going to see them at the Bamboo, and it was packed. And they had been signed to Warner at that point. And I remember being very impressed by, they were the most professional sounding band I'd heard from our scene. You know, they were on another level. And so I remember being really impressed by that. But anyway, so, you know, and they carried on, they did their thing. But after their second album, the first drummer, Cleve Anderson, left the band. He just decided, he had a young family. I think he had 2 or 3 kids at the time. And he had a job as a postman, which was, you know, meant, which, you know, when you're a postman, you got a pension, you know, you get paid well. And it was just heartbreaking for him to be on the road all the time and be away from his kids and his wife. So he just decided, I can't do this. And so after Diamond Mine, he left the band. And then he was replaced by a drummer named Mark French, who was who kind of came sort of from the country scene in Toronto, and who played on Casino, which was Rodeo's third album. But during the recording of that record, they did that record with a LA producer named Pete Anderson, who was known for producing. He produced Dwight Yoakam, And he was also a wicked guitar player and played in Dwight Yoakam's band, and he also produced Michelle Shocked. So at the time, this would be like 1988, 89. He was a very reputable producer. And this was, you know, Mark had not spent a lot of time in the studio. And when he went down there, Pete Anderson really kind of undermined his confidence. And I think it had a kind of lasting effect on Mark. And after that, he was kind of having difficulty in the band. He had a lot of tendonitis and things like this, and it just I don't know. That relationship with him and Rodeo just didn't work out, you know. And so after a few years, they decided, like, I think, you know, we need to look for another drummer, and they knew about me. They'd known about me for years. They used to come and they go see Vital Signs and the Garbage Man and these other bands. So they knew of me as a drummer, but they never considered me as a possible drummer for Blue Rodeo because the music I was playing was so wildly different from Blue Rodeo. And then Andrew Cash did a gig, I think it was at University of Guelph, opening for Blue Rodeo. And they saw me play that gig, and at the time they went like, oh, you know, he can play roots music. Like, he does do that. And so when they were thinking of looking for another drummer, they gave me a call. They actually gave Andrew a call, and they said, because Andrew wasn't doing so much at this time. And actually, it was while Andrew was kind of on hiatus, because he'd left Island Records and he was looking for a new deal. And so while he was on hiatus, I'd played with Andy Curran and toured with Andy Curran, and then that ended, and I got asked to record this record with a band called Change of Heart. Now, Change of Heart, probably not that well remembered now, except by people who were devoted to them then. But Change of Heart were a very influential and important band at the time in the Canadian independent music scene. They were kind of regarded as the band that were the trailblazers of the independent touring scene in Canada. They were the first band that just was like, okay, nobody knows we exist, nobody knows who we are. We're gonna get a van across Canada, and we're gonna tour across Canada, and we're gonna play. You know, so they called, you know, some club in Vancouver, hey, we're Change of Heart, we're from Toronto, can we play a bar? Okay, sure, you know. And so they kind of blazed that trail. And I got asked to record a record with them, which was going to be a double album called Smile, which I did. And that went on to be a pretty sort of important record and a well-regarded record in the Canadian independent scene at the time. So I was kind of just signed on to do that when I got a call from Andrew saying, Glenn, I think your ship is coming. And he was like, Jim Cuddy just called me and asked if it was cool if he asked you to audition for Blue Rodeo. And I said, yeah. And Andrew said, yeah, of course it's cool. So Jim called me, and I went and auditioned. And as it turned out, I was one of only, luckily for me, really, I was one of only two people that auditioned. And the other guy that auditioned was a guy named, what is his name? He was a very good drummer, and he was a jazz drummer. And I think I'm going to get his name wrong. So Greg, I think, was his first name. I'm not going to venture his whole name because I'm probably going to get it wrong. But he was a very good drummer, and he was a friend of Bazil's, and he came out and auditioned. But he was a jazz drummer, and he played like a jazz drummer. And then I went out and played with them, and it worked really well, you know, which is in many ways is surprising. But I was, you know, like I said, I'd learned to be an adaptable drummer. At the same time, I was going through like a real metal phase at the time. I was a huge fan in the late 80s, early 90s. I was a huge fan of like Metallica and Slayer and Megadeth. And even though I wasn't playing in bands like that, I was heavy into that music, and I played double pedals on my bass drum and stuff. And so when I started playing with Blue Rodeo, I still had all that, you know, I still had double pedals on my kick, and I was you know, I was kind of playing way too many notes, really. But they were like, this is our style, you know, you got to strip it down, play more simply, play simple fills, you know, single stroke roll fills and things like that. And so I was like, okay, you know, I'll do that. And so I did. And the audition was really to record Lost Together, and then we'd see how to record that album, and then we'd see how it went. So so I spent about a month rehearsing with them. At the same time, I was also rehearsing with Change of Heart to record Smile. And then in January of '92, so that would have been December of '91, I rehearsed with Blue Rodeo and also with Change of Heart. And then January '92, I think it was January 3 and 4, something, 3, 4, 5, I went into the studio, and the Smile record was recorded. And it's, like I said, a double album. I don't know, it's like 20 songs. We recorded the whole thing live off the floor in like 3 days, and which was an incredible experience. And then a few days later, I went into Manta with Blue Rodeo and recorded the drum tracks for Lost Together. And that was interesting too, because at the time, when I joined Blue Rodeo, the band was in a bit of disarray. Which I like at the time, Bobby Wiseman, the original keyboard player, was still in the band, but he was really done with the band, and he had started his own solo career, and he was just fed up with the band. You could just tell. Like, I remember being at rehearsals, and he'd have the newspaper on his keyboard. You know, we'd be talking about the music and stuff, and, you know, trying to talk about a song, and he'd just be flipping through the paper, and then, you know, and then we'd be playing the song, and he would move the paper over and sort of like be glancing at the paper while playing with one hand. And Jim would go like, Bobby, could you just put the paper down? You know, like, he was kind of doing everything he could to show his disinterest, you know. And I remember talking to him about it, going like, you know, you're really not into this. And he's like, yeah, I'm, you know, I really want to leave the band. And he said, like, you know, having you in the band, you know, kind of almost makes me want to stay, but it's just not really enough. I'm just ready to leave. And he did, actually. He left. The last gigs he did a showcase with us at South by Southwest that year, '92. And while he was at South by Southwest, he signed a publishing deal, which gave him an advance. So he just basically gave him a financial cushion, so he felt like he could leave the band, and he did. And so he played the record release party for Lost Together, and I think that was his last gig with the band. And yeah, so yeah, after that, you know, I started gigging with the band, and we didn't have a keyboard player for a while, actually. But we did have a pedal steel player, and that was an interesting period as well, where we were doing songs like Diamond Mine without keyboards, and so Greg would just do a really long guitar solo. And it was a strange period, you know, because obviously we were a keyboard-heavy band, especially in the early days. You know, Bobby was kind of like Bobby Wiseman was kind of the ringer in the band. He was the guy that you threw all the solos to, you know. Actually, Jim Cuddy was kind of the lead guitar player as well at that point. And then, but when I joined, Greg kind of took over doing more leads. And then we got James Gray in the band, and James was a friend of mine, and he auditioned. We actually auditioned 12 people before we got James out to audition. And that was because I knew James was an amazing keyboard player, and I knew he could pull off the gig. But and I loved James, but I'd been in bands with James, and James was challenging to be in bands with. You know, he was not an easy guy to be in bands with. But ultimately I thought like, okay, we couldn't find the right guy. And so I said, okay, James, come on out. And he came out and he blew everybody away and got the gig right away. And I remember after they joined him, I said, okay, guys, I got to warn you, he's difficult. And they were, what are you talking about? He's great. And then he was with us for the next 13 years and they found out what I meant. But, you know, even though he was difficult, like the thing about Blue Rodeo is it's a really hard band to get fired from. You actually have to screw up really, really badly to get fired. There's a very high level of dysfunction that is tolerated in that band, which I saw when I joined the band. There was a high level of dysfunction. You know what I mean? Like even though Bobby Wiseman made it absolutely clear that he did not want to be in that band, nobody thought to say like, Bobby, why don't you leave? Like they were just like, okay, he hates us, but he's our guy, so let's go, Bobby. You know, like there was just always like a very high tolerance for kind of craziness, you know, and which I'm going to say now is still present, but to a lesser degree, to a much more tolerable degree. But I imagine that's kind of in every band, you know, musicians. I've since learned it's not just musicians. I think this is probably in every profession, but you know, there's a certain amount of crazy built into the creative professions, I suppose, and music is no exception. And,
I have a couple quotes sent in from your crazy band members from Blue Rodeo. So I have some words here from Mike Boguski. Boguski, am I saying that right?
Michael Boguski.
Bogu. So piano and organ for Blue Rodeo. So he says, Glenn is the best drummer in the country, and he pushes me to be a better musician. He has the biggest heart of anyone I know, and he cares deeply about others. He inspires me to be a better person. So that's from Mike. And then not to be outdone, from Bazil, Donovan, bass player for Blue Rodeo. He says, as well as being a great friend of mine, Glenn is much more than just one of the greatest drummers around. He is also a great all-around musician and singer-songwriter. He plays guitar well and is all-around musical. It's in his bones. I've been blessed to play with him for over 20 years now.
30 years.
30 years. We got to update
30
that
years
quote.
now. This is my 30th year with him. That's really sweet. Well, I'm not the best drummer in the country, though. That's a really nice thing to say. That's an entirely subjective thing. But I mean, as I said earlier, there's many drummers who can play circles around me. But I will.
It's nice when your band members think that, though, right?
That's a really nice thing to say. But like I say, I'm the best Glenn Milchem in the world. And yeah, but that's really sweet. And those guys, you know, they're amazing. You know, Bazil's an amazing musician and bass player and really deep. And so is Michael. You know, Michael has a lot of depth to his playing. He's well versed in jazz and classical music, and you know, and he's someone who's also kept working at his instrument. You know, after he joined our band, he took an improvisation course with this teacher at York University, who many musicians I know studied with, named Casey Sokol, including Bobby Wiseman. And Bobby Wiseman was a student of Casey Sokol's, and Bobby came very much from kind of an avant-garde improvisational background. And I thought it was really cool and smart of Michael to study with him, to bring that element into his playing, because the sort of improvisational element is a really important part of Blue Rodeo's music. And it's one of the things I love about Blue Rodeo, because Blue Rodeo, and it's one of the reasons that I ended up being their drummer, because they could have just got someone who was kind of like, you know, oh, here's a good country rock drummer. But they got someone whose background was not bad at all. They got someone, because I also, you know, like I say, I was playing in bands like White Noise, who there was a lot of improvisation in that band. That was kind of a jazz-based band who played odd time signatures. Like, it was important to them to have elements in the band that could draw from places other than just country and rock and roll. And that was always an important part of the band. Like having Bobby Wiseman in the band, like when you listen to the first Blue Rodeo record, or you listen to Diamond Mine, you listen to the solo on Diamond Mine, or Bobby's solo on, say, Floating on the first Blue Rodeo record, those are not typical keyboard solos. There are sort of avant-garde elements in there. There's elements of improvisation. And that was one of the things that made the band great and made the band interesting and have more to them than just your typical, sort of country rock band. And I think, and it was one of the things that I think people loved about the band and found interesting about the band, and that contributed to their success. And that's always remained an element of the band. Like Bobby Wiseman's replacement, James Gray, also came from a very, very background that was not roots music. He came kind of from the same place I did, this post-punk scene, So, yeah, that's always been an important part of our music. And there's always been, and like Bazil, on the other hand, Bazil came from like a new wave background. He was in a band called the Sharks before, which was the rhythm section for the Sharks was Bazil and the original rodeo drummer Cleve Anderson. And but before he was in the Sharks, Bazil played country music. Bazil started playing in country bands in like, I don't know, like when he was very young, like 18, 19, like 19. He's been playing for like since 1972, because I remember him saying to me, I've been playing music professionally for 50 years now. So he started playing in country bands in 72. So he had he loved Elvis Costello and he was deeply into all that kind of music that was also a big influence on Jim and Greg, but he also had very deep country roots. And so all those elements are combined to make Blue Rodeo what it was and still is, and all the people in the band who have been in it since have contributed to that.
So to bring our listeners up to speed on what Blue Rodeo was up to before you joined the band. So they released 3 albums between 87 and 1990. So there was Outskirts, Diamond Mine, and Casino. These albums went 4 times platinum, 3 times platinum, and double platinum. It had some of the classic Blue Rodeo songs like Try, Diamond Mine, Trust Yourself, Till I Am Myself Again.
Yep.
When you're auditioning for the band, there must be excitement, but are you also nervous that you're auditioning for a band that's batting 100%? They're 3 for 3 with multi-platinum albums. Do you have any fear that you might be messing with the magic formula?
No, I didn't feel that way. I thought that I had something to bring to the table that they didn't have before. That was just different, and that I thought it was, I thought I could make it work, and I did. I'd already been in a lot of bands at that point, and I'd already played with a lot of accomplished musicians, so I didn't feel nervous, like, am I good enough, or like I knew that I could, I played music that was a lot more challenging and difficult than Rodeo's, though their music was challenging and difficult in ways to me that were different, like because in that I had to streamline my playing with them, and I had to learn to be more dynamic with them as well, because my thing was that was one thing when Andy said, like, oh, Glenn loved playing with me. I said to me, because he could hit as hard as he could, I never complained, because at the time in the late 80s and during the 80s, like, part of my reputation was I was a really loud, hard-hitting drummer, and which at the time I definitely viewed as an asset. I remember seeing this interview with Dave Grohl where he talked about when he first went out, his thing was, I just wanted to be the guy that like when people saw me play, they were just like, holy shit, can you believe how hard that drummer was hitting the drums? And like, can you I wanted them to walk out of there going like, I can't believe that drummer. And that was kind of my attitude too. Like, I wanted them to remember me. I wanted them to be like, that was the guy that like every snare hit started up here, like, you know, and I was putting my whole body and every force of my being into what I was doing, you know. And when I joined Blue Rodeo, I had to dial that back, you know. And I actually had to dial that back with Andrew Cash too. You know, I had to dial that back with a lot of people, and it took me years to learn to do that. Partly because that was, you know, especially when I was younger, that was very much part of my energy. And I'm still known as a hard-hitting drummer, but I hope I'm also known now as a dynamic drummer and someone who's capable of playing very softly when required. And but that was something I had to adapt to with Blue Rodeo. So, but I went in there confident because I certainly knew that I could pull off whatever was required of me technically, you know, to do the record and to be in the band. But it was more the process of having to contain myself that was challenging and kind of has remained challenging over the years with rodeo. You know,
so it's an exercise in restraint and also playing what's best for the song and not necessarily, you know, the ego showing off what you could actually do with your talent.
Exactly. Like, so, you know, when I first joined Blue Rodeo, like I was saying, I was still playing double pedals. And if you listen to Lost Together, at the end of some of the songs where there's like sort of scrubs where the band's going like, blah, 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 you know, like you can hear the double bass drum going like, you know, and I have live recordings of me with the band from that period, from the early 90s, where I still was playing double pedals. And sometimes it sounds like the drummer from Megadeth is sitting in with Blue Rodeo. Like, it's just all kinds of wrong. And it took me a couple of years before I realized, I think I should stop playing the double pedal with these guys. It's just not really right, you know.
I was just in Montreal to see Megadeth, so I can picture the drummer. That I have that clear as day. And I think it could actually work with those drums, with maybe a heavy remix of some Blue Rodeo songs.
Yeah, you know, I would save it for the outros of some songs or something. But it was still like, when I listened to those live recordings, I'm like, oh man, I'm glad I stopped doing that, because that is just not right. And they were very tolerant. They let me. I think it was because it was the early 90s. And at the time, you know, grunge was huge. And we were the band was definitely kind of dabbling with elements of that. You know, Greg went and got a big muff pedal, you know, and grew his hair long and curly, you know, like the grunge thing was influencing everybody at the time, even if it was just a little bit, you know. And so at that point, rodeo also when I joined, rodeo kind of got louder than ever, partly because of grunge and also because, like, hey, we have this new really loud drummer. And so, you know, we were, during the Lost Together tour, we were super loud, and which we ended up having to dial back, because that was at that point that Greg got tinnitus, and he was like, I got tinnitus, we have to be quieter, you know. And so then there became years of trying to be quieter, you know.
Greg starts to look like Eddie Vedder up there with his long hair.
He had long curly blonde hair when I joined. Yeah, if you look at what you can see on the cover of Lost Together, and then there's pictures of him with his long blonde hair. But yeah, that was sorry. Well, that was just the thing at the time, you know. But after that record, we did 5 days, and we did a complete about face, and we made an acoustic record. Which I remember at the time going, oh my God, an acoustic record. Can we just get this? And they were like, yeah, and you just play brushes and things. I'm like, what? You know? Okay, well, we'll just do this and we'll get this out of the way, and then we'll go back to making proper rock records, you know. And little did I know that was our future, really, you know. I mean, if anything defined or redefined the band, it was 5 days in July doing that record, completely redefined the band.